All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you for saying hello. It's great to have you all here. My name is Danielle Barnes. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the CEO of Women Talk Design. And I am thrilled to have you here for our Speaker Stories event. I know that I see some familiar faces, some folks who might be joining for the first time, so welcome. A quick rundown of how this event will work. So we're going to kick things off hearing from our speaker, who I'll introduce in just a bit, and very excited to have Lola here with us today. And then we really want to hear from you. So think about what questions you have about public speaking that you want to ask Lola, and about halfway through, we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So start thinking of those questions now. And then the last 15 minutes is a chance for y'all to get to know one another. So if you can stick around, we hope you can. We will break you out into small groups and have some prompts so that we can keep the conversation going and you can connect with other people in the community. You'll see that this is being recorded. We'll have a blog post and video that we share afterwards as a follow-up. And then there's also live captioning with Otter AI. So if you see the live streaming up at the corner of your event, that's the live captioning. You can click on and follow along that way. So without further ado, we're going to get started. I am so thrilled to have Lola Oyelayo-Pearson here with us today. Lola is a digital design and product strategist with a wealth of experience running in-house and agency design teams. She currently leads a multidisciplinary user experience team at Shopify in Toronto, helping merchants leverage custom financial products and exploit multi-channel sales opportunities. Prior to that, her experience includes leading the UK design team for Capital One, heading up proposition design for a highly regarded blockchain startup, and leading a successful products and services agency, Cognizant. A passionate technophile, Lola operates at a strategic level, helping organizations to see the bigger picture and focus on outcomes that matter in order to establish high-performing design cultures. Lola has spoken at events all over the world, including the Leading Design Fest, Flexible, EuroIA, Afrotech, and a dozen other events. So please join me in welcoming Lola.
Thank you, Daniel. It's so strange to have someone like do an intro for you and talk about you in that way. It's always one of those where you're like, oh my God.
Well, you are very impressive. And so I'm glad to be able to share all of that with everyone. And we're so glad to have you here and hear about your public speaking journey. So I want to get started just by hearing from you. I'd love to hear why you speak.
I thought about this question. Anyone who knows me will tell you I'm somebody who has opinions on everything. I have to say that doesn't always mean they're like valid opinions, but if you give me a chance to have an opinion on something, I'm going to give you a point of view. And I enjoy sharing. I enjoy like debate. I enjoy conversations. I enjoy like challenging myself. And I think like public speaking is just another way for me to put my opinions out there in the world and invite the feedback, invite the conversation, be a part of the discourse on something. And as much as possible, I try and do my public speaking around things that I know about rather than just have opinions on. But to be honest, if you catch me on any given day, I'll probably give you opinions on something I have no business having an opinion on. And it's just in my nature to kind of be opinionated, I guess.
Awesome. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you have opinions on right now that you're sharing? I know I got to hear you deliver a really powerful talk on wicked problems. And I know that that's a topic that you spoke a lot on. And I'd love to hear, what is it that you are sharing currently?
So I still talk about wicked problems because I think that when I first defined what I wanted to say around that topic, especially within tech, I didn't realize how current it would be in terms of recognizing that like people see tech as like future facing and, oh, we're solving problems. And even in tech, sometimes you're kind of working in a way that's like, okay, now we've nailed it and we move on. The reality is that the job is never done. And for every problem you solve, you generate a bunch of others. And you create new problems to solve and new things to address. So the concept of wicked problems I'm finding super interesting to talk about the evolution. I also talk about leadership a lot more now. I feel like I'm kind of completing my 10 years as a leader, as a people leader, as an organizational leader. I've learned a lot. I've made a ton of mistakes. And so I reflect on that in talks. And then the final thing that I'm really interested in talking about right now is just future of money. So that kind of aligns with the work I'm doing at Shopify right now, but also it is part of my contribution to kind of the recognition that, like, you know, when racial equity became a conversation that was, everybody was having this conversation last year, the thing that annoyed me the most is this idea that I'm going to change anyone's mind. I don't have time to change your mind. What I do have time for, however, is the economic emancipation that allows anyone to direct their own future in a way that suits them. So that's the bit that has been taken away from a lot of underrepresented groups, and historically kind of targeted groups. And so I love the idea of trying to give back some of that economic emancipation and create equity. So it doesn't really matter if you have a different opinion of one racial group or a cultural group or a demographic. That's your business. That the point at which you get to stand in front of their economic livelihoods, we need to take that away. Like, that power dominance can't exist. Diversity of opinion, great. I don't really want to change your mind, but you can't prevent me from living my full life. And so I'm speaking about money as an enabler for economic emancipation in that sense. And that I'm super passionate about that at the moment as well. Haven't done a public talk, but I've done a lot of internal talks, and that's an opinion I'm sharing a lot with friends and folks who listen.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I feel like many of us would love to hear that. So I hope that you do give it as a public talk soon.
I will. I'm working on it.
Great. Awesome. I'd love to go back to talk about the early parts of your speaking journey. So how you got started, if you can think back to what your first speaking engagement was, what was that experience? How did you get that opportunity, and what was it like?
Yeah, I struggle to remember this. So I feel like my first speaking engagement was probably, so there's like a split. The first time I did a presentation in front of an audience was in a work context. So through my graduate program when I was maybe 23, 24, and it was more about, I was pitching a program that I was developing with my team. And so I presented to the executive. There was like a conference for the execs, and there were like, I don't know, 50 of them there, and of the most senior people in the company. And then I was like this grad that came in and spoke about both equal parts scary, but also just really validating. I knew what I was talking about. I enjoyed being on stage. I get nervous, and I certainly was nervous, but something I've always had my whole life is I have a very high threshold for shame. So I don't embarrass that easily. So being on stage didn't embarrass me. I didn't feel like I needed to be perfect in the way that I said, you know, I stumbled my words, and I was kind of okay with that, but that's always been a part of my personality. So I just was able to really enjoy it. And from then I took every other opportunity. I volunteered to do talks initially because UX in the UK was sort of a very active grassroots discipline. And so there were meetups constantly, and I would opt in to kind of sharing my learning journey. And then I started organizing events, and that gave me the opportunity to both see and watch and learn from other speakers, and find speakers, and build like programs around stuff. And so I just got really into the idea of having an opinion again, and creating spaces where conversations happened. And I still enjoy it to this day. I haven't, you know, I'm still waiting for the day when I fall over on stage or like do something like really, really embarrassing. But so far it's all been mostly positive and fairly good.
That's good. Good news. We hope that you don't fall over on stage, but it sounds like you can handle it if you did. So that's good.
I'd laugh it off.
Yeah. And I know that you said, you know, early on, you said yes to every opportunity and spoke at a lot of local events. I'm curious if that's still the case. Is it still yes to everything, or how do you decide where to speak and where not
Yeah.
to share your ideas?
Yeah, no, that changed. So I guess a couple of things changed. I became a parent, and so time became more precious, and I had to pick what I said yes to, because I had to, everything I say yes to is basically me expecting my husband to do the primary caring. So we had to coordinate that. I have more responsibility at work, and so I'm just like my calendar is just more of a nightmare. And so I'm more discerning about the event types. And then I had a really great coaching session from a mentor of mine in the UK about 5 years ago, who, you know, I was kind of reflecting on, I feel like I say no too often and I feel really bad because I love the event or people come up with a great idea and I'm like, oh, I'd really love to speak there. And he was like, do you know what? Just start charging for your time. And so actually what I find now is requiring payment is a great filter for things. You know, there are lots of free events, and for good reasons. I would love to be able to do all of them, but I pick and choose the ones that I do now. And if actually I think in order for me to prioritize doing this event, if I'm being paid, I will be able to prioritize it. If I'm not being paid, I need to decide if I actually want to spend my time that way. And so I find it as an easy way to pick and filter. And yeah, I say no more often than I used to, but I think for very good reasons. Sanity and family life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that makes sense. Different parts of your life, there's different things you're prioritizing, and the ability
Exactly.
to say no is an important skill. So that's great. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your process for developing your talk. So I know that you shared the different topics that you like to talk on,
Yeah.
but how do you, once you have that idea, build it into a presentation and then ultimately prepare to get ready to speak?
Yeah, so I've evolved that a little bit. So initially what I used to do is almost like I'd have a point of view and then I would go straight into creating a deck. And I would think about, I would like, you know, I kind of start, I typically work and like put everything in, like trash and like ignore quality, and then go through and start pulling stuff out and start shaping like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where that was kind of okay in the days when I would say my talks were almost like case studies. We did a thing, here's what we did, here's what happened, here's what I learned. As I've kind of evolved a lot of my talks to be almost like triggers for thought or mental models or even like ways of kind of cultivating and discussion, I've had to evolve it. So I now start with almost like a blog post. And like I write long form what I'm thinking. I try and articulate my perspective in long form. And then I take that long form version and I deconstruct it into a deck. I found it makes my decks shorter, interestingly, because I find it easier to edit myself from like written content into slides than to create lots of slides and then pull the slides out. I almost feel like I'm invested in the slides. So I find I struggle to make it shorter. Whereas if I never created the slides in the first place, it's much easier to kind of go that way. And but it's also more challenging. Like I have a little bit more imposter syndrome in this kind of new world of conversation. I feel like I'm talking about harder subjects, harder concepts. There are always a million people who are more qualified than me to speak on something. And so I go through a process of really saying like, what is my voice? What is the thing that I'm trying to say through this? And sometimes that might be as a learner. So I did a talk on blockchain when I was in a blockchain startup. And there is no way I'm an expert on that subject by no means, but I pivoted to focus the talk on here is a learning journey I have been on, and here are some things I have learned that might be useful for you as well. And here's an opinion I have formed based on what I learned. So it was less about being an expert and more about being somebody who could talk about being on a journey. So yeah, I find that I'm now evolving into like genuine and long form ways of expressing my thinking and then turning it into talks ready for, and it also makes it easier when I have different time slots. So I repeat my talk sometimes and occasionally you'll be like, yeah, you've got a 45-minute slot so you can speak for 35 minutes and then there's questions. And sometimes it's like you've got 25 minutes all in. And I find it easier to create long and short versions of a talk once I've done the long form exercise and I can like edit the presentation down, as opposed to when I had, no, the whole thing only works if I do the slides in this particular way. It's no longer the case.
There's so much good stuff there that you just shared. I First, I want to thank you for just highlighting that piece of, if really bringing your own perspective and figuring out if you don't feel like an expert, how you can still add to the conversation. And I think the
Yeah.
example that you shared was really powerful.
Yeah.
That's something we hear a lot from folks in the Women Talk Design community is, how do I figure out my unique perspective on this, especially if so many people are talking about it already. And so thank you for sharing that example. That was a great one.
Yeah, I'm super passionate about that actually, because I feel like some of the best talks I've listened to are not from the expert in the thing. They're from somebody who's on a learning journey. And so they have been able to apply a perspective that maybe the experts themselves don't have, right? It's almost like that idea of like knowledge I've already got. So I'm almost like operating at a level above the basics, whereas somebody on a learning journey is still working through some foundations. And so as a learner at conferences, I often find myself enjoying the talks where people are kind of sharing their journey more than saying, I'm already here, now I'm going to tell you what you need to think about this subject.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because that's probably what I'm doing more of at the moment. But anyway.
You approached it from all different sides.
All the angles. Yeah.
I'm curious too, you mentioned that you now create almost this blog post before you turn it into a talk. Is that something that you publish or is that something that you just use for yourself?
In one case, I published it as well to create. So when I first did the Wicked Problems talk, it went down really well. The video was watched. A lot of people kept coming back at me for my slides in the video. So I tidied up the long form version and then I posted it on my blog. And it's still one of the most visited articles on my Medium blog. So I think that was a good call. I'm not sure the rest of it is needed. I mean, the thing is like, so I'm also really honest about what I'm good at. I can communicate very well, but I'm not kidding anyone. I'm not the world's best writer. So I don't feel like it's a natural thing to post every single one of the long form versions, but it is a great way for me to make sure that I've got, I do like thinking about storytelling, like a beginning, a middle, and end, like what's the drama, what's the theater, what's the element of surprise, or like composing a discussion is like something I do think I'm good at. And so that long form version has helped me to hone that a lot more than just thinking in terms of slides. And I'm also feeling, I haven't done it yet, but I'm also looking forward to the day I do a TED style talk where there are no slides, right? It's just you, the storyteller, and the audience. That's an as yet unmet challenge, but I'm looking forward to it because I think this approach probably works quite well for that kind of thing too.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you think of this too as like, how can I continue to evolve and challenge myself, which is really great.
Yeah,
great.
Definitely.
I have a couple more questions for Lola, but then we're going to open it up. We want to hear from you. So feel free to start adding your questions into the chat and I'll read them. If you want to speak yourself, you can raise your hand, use the like raise hand tool, and I'll call on you to unmute. So either way, but we'll open it up to y'all's questions in just a couple minutes. Lola, one of my other questions for you is about the impact that public speaking has had on your career. So I'm curious if you've seen an impact and if you have any future public speaking goals. I know you just mentioned a TED style talk. So
yeah, I have definitely seen an impact. I maybe see the positives and the negatives of this equally, but I recognize that people want to validate when they're hiring leaders in tech. They do kind of want to validate your experience. And there's that sense that like pre-validation is hard to find if you don't exist on the web. And I have my own site. I post links to the videos of all of my talks on there. I link it through to my LinkedIn profile. And I have had feedback that it's one of the things that made me, so in my current role, I was found, I did not apply. And so I'm still like, how did you find me? Well, somebody mentioned something, they Googled, they followed the trail, they listened to a talk, and here they are. And so it has generated work. It has generated opportunities for me. And it's also allowed me to be invited to forums that I'm not even sure like I would have been invited to necessarily, because I just exist as a female in this tech space, and as a Black female in this tech space, I'm probably a little bit rarer than for some people. So yeah, I have definitely found that speaking opens doors. The other thing that it's done for me is just the richness in my network. Every time I do a speaking event, I connect with a ton of people. whether it's in person or virtually, they're just like a growth of my network and interesting conversations that I almost always have afterwards. And I really enjoy that part of it as well, because, you know, if you kind of play the algorithms game of Twitter or LinkedIn, for every new person that you connect to, you can get a door opening to like their network, and suddenly you get like this richness of suggestions and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy the fact that it has created both social and professional opportunities for me.
That's great. And then my last question for now, I have plenty more if we have a quiet audience,
Yeah.
is what piece of advice would you give to new speakers?
So, oh God, so much. Uh, I think it's the make sure you know what you think. I think public speaking, again, I'll ground it in tech to a certain extent. It does feel a bit like a rite of passage. It's like a thing you need to say you have done. And sometimes I think people do it for the sake of doing it, as opposed to recognizing that, hey, I'm allowed to, one, have an opinion, and two, share my opinion. And so like, I always ground back to like when I'm, you know, walking through talks with people, or they're saying they want to speak about something, I'm like, okay, work on making sure you really get what you think, like formulate your opinion, know where your boundaries are, know how you think about it. Because also when you get the questions at the end, if someone said, what about X? You don't want to be like, oh, I don't know, or I don't have an opinion on that. Like, you can definitely say, I don't know. But if you do have an opinion, make sure you formulated your opinion, and then everything else is just learning. Everything else is practice. The forming an opinion part, I think, is the thing that is where you need to start every single time.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So we have a question from LD in the chat. Are there any specific speaking events you are careful to avoid?
Yes. So again, speaking specifically to the racial awakening of the world, I refuse to be a token. So I have been approached a lot where it's clear that I was the last minute, oops, we don't have a person of color type addition to the forum. I don't think I need to help you with that. It's fine if that's the situation you're in. I just, again, because my life is the way it is, I don't need to hustle my life in order to be the last minute person of color badge on your event. I also try not to speak at events where I don't know who my audience is really. So like I know there are like giant conference companies around the world that do these like, you know, big business deals, and they've got 2,000 sponsors, and they've got 72 stages and topics and 25 tracks. I've never been to one of those and felt like I got all the value that I would have wanted from those events. It always felt a little bit advertising-y. So I don't speak at those kinds of things. I've been asked a couple of times. It's not like they're knocking down my door, but I'm just kind of like, I don't know who you're trying to speak to at this conference. And so I don't know that my people would be there. And therefore it's very hard for me to craft an opinion or share a topic. And so I'm going to step away from that. So yeah, I try and be quite picky about like, is it worth my time? Like, will I get value out of attending, participating, the discussions, the network I build? And actually, am I a token? Because if I'm a token, I'm okay to sit this one out. But if it's a genuine value add, then that's a great marriage on both sides.
That's a great decision-making lens to look at it through.
Yeah.
Maddie wants to know about how you presented some of the case studies. So you mentioned presenting case studies in the beginning of your career. She wants to know, do you have any helpful frames for presenting a project in an engaging way?
Yeah, so it comes back to what I was saying about what's your opinion. So even when I was presenting projects, so I'll give you an example. There was one project I did a couple of talks around where my team built a big data solution for a supermarket in the UK called Tesco. So they basically had all of this like quantitative data: what was sold, when was it sold, how much was the transaction for, how many items did we sell, like reams and reams of all of this data. And then they had all of this like slow research, interviews, survey feedback. And they couldn't put those two different types of data together to answer some basic questions like, if we were to offer discounts to people, would they be more likely to shop on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? So they had these like very humane questions that would help them plan and do strategy, but they couldn't make their quant data and their qual data like connect together. And so we did this project, and it was super interesting because, like, from a tech perspective, we were using a Hadoop cluster, and we had a quant analyst who I'd never worked with anyone who literally all their work was in spreadsheets and formulas, and we all had to learn a little bit of code. And then I had to somehow come up with an experience for this that made sense. It's like, as a person who wants to ask this random question, how would I navigate an interface that could answer those questions? So super interesting project. But I didn't want to present it as just like a project. It was like super geeky that way. So when I kind of stepped back, my opinion was that quant equals qual, right? So my opinion was, we've entered like super geeky now, but there's like an author I love called Isaac Asimov, and he's got a series called Foundation Series. It's coming to Apple next year, so everybody will learn about it. And in the first book, he introduces this pseudoscience called psychohistory, which is basically the ability to predict the future based on large data sets of people. And I was like, that's big data. That's kind of where we are now. We put tons and tons of quantitative data that looks like it's just like, here's a bar graph. And then you realize that once you've got enough, you've actually got a qualitative narrative. This is what happens when people do X. This is how people show up. And so my opinion was quant equals qual. And here's a story I can tell you about how qualitative insights come from quantitative data sets. And here's a case study that allowed me to demonstrate that reality come into life. So even in the case where you've got a project, you've got what you did, which is interesting to some people, but then I think there's probably an opinion that you formed as a result of that project. And that might be the thing that you actually make the hook of your story. This is why I've learned that X equals this, or this is why this is now true. This is why I'm proposing that we all think about this thing in a different way. So kind of still use your voice, even as you're using the case study as like the reason why you have that opinion.
That's a great piece of advice and a really great example of how that all comes together. I think oftentimes we can think of a case study as being something that's just like straightforward and maybe, not as engaging. And so to really focus it around what is it that you want to share? What is the opinion you want to share is a great starting point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Christine wants to know if you have any advice or tips on submitting proposals for conferences, like great titles for your talk, anything that you would include in a proposal or way of presenting your idea to get more buy-in.
Yeah, so most conferences that have like open for calls will tell you like, here's a theme, here's an area that we're interested in receiving talks from. What I have done in the past is, again, like I said earlier on, and you'll hear it coming through, I'm a big believer in storytelling. Like, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end, here's the protagonist, here's the drama. In a conference proposal, I apply that same logic, right? So based on the theme, what is that top line story arc that I'm going to be able to create for your audience with my topic? I want to walk you through how you can think about X. I want to introduce an entire new way of thinking. I want to challenge the world of people who think this, that, and the other. And what I have always found was work for me on the conferences I've submitted to is I don't have to have it worked out when I submit the proposal. I simply need to have like a really great story pitch in mind. So there are some conferences where I've like pitched 3 or 4 proposals because I've got a few different ideas, and the feedback will come and tell me which one is the strongest one, and then we can go with it. But it's almost framing it as it is a story. They're reading lots of stories. If that is a boring story, if it's an interesting story, it makes them think, I wonder how they're going to do that. You're probably more likely to be considered. That's probably different for like academic conferences where there's probably like more of a formula of things you need to have achieved or stated or make possible in order to be admitted to an academic conference. But for like a non-academic context, I've always found like going with like telling a great story and really dialing up how you can bring some of that theater and drama to the conference, because that's what the curators are looking for, right? They're trying to put together a program of talks that are interesting, different, that people are going to be like, whoa, that was so cool. They want to generate buzz on Twitter. So you want to be able to present yourself as somebody who can bring that level of storytelling and energy to their conference. And so your pitch has to almost have that crafted story element to it.
That's great. Before, you talked about the importance of knowing your audience and that you didn't want to speak somewhere if you didn't feel like you knew the audience or they were aligned with what you wanted to talk about. And LD wants to know, how might you get better context and background on your audience in this age of digital presentations?
Ask the organizers. So it's like, who are they targeting? Who do they think is going to show up? I speak at a lot of UX and tech conferences, so I'm familiar with the organizers, or I might be familiar with like, okay, I've heard of this event before, or the title or the theme gives me an idea of who they're trying to attract. Where that is less clear, just ask them outright. If they've gotten sponsorship to invest in a streaming platform online, or even do the marketing and website, you can bet they've had to pitch their audience to somebody. So they probably got a blurb and they understand who they're targeting. And I think that would be a great way for you to understand whether you think those are your people. And I say, when I say like knowing your audience, I don't necessarily mean like only speaking to people who, like, there's value in speaking to an audience that doesn't know your discipline and doesn't know your skill set, and you're introducing new knowledge to them. It's more about being able to picture who those people are. So again, I don't know that I am the most useful person to speak at a sales conference where someone's trying to sell in the value of UX. Maybe we can get some actual salespeople to do that because they can speak the language of sales. But I would be very useful at a conference that was talking to execs about the value of creating a design organization from the ground up, because those are the decision makers who need to understand where this information is coming from, but they don't know my discipline. That's my audience. I'm still going to go there. So just kind of weighing it out, but just ask the conference organizers. They should be able to tell you. And if they can't, that's probably a sign that it's not necessarily going to be the best organized thing that you want to spend your time on.
Yeah, that's a smart too, thinking about, like you said, they're pitching this to sponsors, so they should have this information. That's a great reminder.
Yeah. There's a lot of prep work that goes into organizing events. And I think like people underestimate that there is that material available and that it's a two-way thing, right? Like you're kind of helping each other out by being a speaker at their event. You're providing credence to what they're doing and vice versa. And so it's okay to kind of approach that as a relationship of equals as opposed to a power imbalance in that sense.
Yeah. Charlene wants to know if you think your blogs open up doors for you on getting speaking engagements.
Maybe. I'd say it's probably more that like having had an internet presence is opening the door. So like hacking the SEO game. So like when I created my latest website, it's probably a bit out of date. I probably need to update it. But like I pulled all of the videos I found of any talk that I'd done into my site. So all of those links live in one place. And so I tried to increase the likelihood that if you Googled me, you would discover my site. And so you would see the sort of the quality and the range of talks that I've done. So my blog is also on there. It's linked through. So it's quite possible. But I think the ultimate thing is I think I'm a bit more discoverable than I would be if I hadn't started to pull all that information together. It also helps to have a very unique, hard to pronounce, easy to misspell name. So like I found friends have told me all the variants of misspelling my name still find me somewhere. So that's kind of okay.
So part of your personal brand.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take it.
Great. LD has another question about almost, I think, the future of conferences in the UX industry. She wants to know, as UX becomes more codified, should we be concerned that conferences are turning into certification sessions, which may create barriers to entry? Who would control those certifications anyway?
So this is so interesting because it makes me think of a debate I had on LinkedIn just this last weekend. I strongly disagree with us codifying UX. I strongly disagree with the idea that it's a homogenous discipline. I think it's a group of skills that we are evolving in response to the reality of the like products and services that we're working on. And we shouldn't have a single way of doing that any more than you have a single way of practicing medicine in the world. Like we've seen with COVID, like different countries, everybody cares about the health and well-being and people being alive and not dead. And yet different countries have completely different requirements for certifying a vaccine. One country says it's yay, another country says it's no. Why on earth would we want a UX discipline that has one way of doing it? And so I disagree with, and I'm resisting the idea that there is a singular qualifiable certification validation route for UX. And I think we get more value by having like richness and variance and things that are very, very targeted at the problems that they're solving. The other thing that I reflect on a lot as, again, I am born in Nigeria, raised in the UK. I currently live in Canada, travel the world a lot. I feel like I occupy this third culture space where I see things from very different lenses. What we consider good UX in the Northern Hemisphere cannot just be transplanted into the Nigerian digital landscape. It ignores the realities of that environment, and it also doesn't allow space for like cultural specifics that are valuable. Or even in my work now at Shopify, I have a team based in APAC, Asia Pacific. There is no way in hell that I would expect that I could do a UX review of a UI in Cantonese or Japanese and somehow tell them what's good and bad. Like that's just dumb for me to do that. I have zero cultural affiliation that allows me to define what good and bad is in that cultural context. And so why would a certification that I have be valid there? It wouldn't. And so I don't know that there's any reason for us to kind of narrow the field or throttle who gets to say I'm a UXer or I'm good at this. Hopefully people will, that doesn't mean there isn't trash. There's trash in every discipline. I've met a fair few rubbish developers and engineers, really bad teachers, a lot of bad politicians I've seen in my life. So like there's good and bad in any discipline. That shouldn't mean that we focus more on creating this barrier to entry that is certification or whatever. The other thing I'll say about this is when I started out in my career, my first proper UX job was in an agency in London called Flow. And some of the most amazing people I worked with had no qualifications in tech, an architect, a nurse, a psychiatric nurse, a self-taught designer. And yet they're probably still, in my mind, the best teachers that I had in my craft. And by what we're trying to do now, in some ways, we would have avoided them entering the discipline. So it's like, no, I'm not okay with that. See what I said about opinions?
We love hearing your opinions. This is great. And y'all, we have just a couple minutes left for questions. So if you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, and there's something on your mind, you came here for a reason. We want to hear from you. So feel free to drop that in the chat. Lola, I'm hoping that we could talk about for a minute the idea of getting paid to speak, because I know that this is something that comes up a lot within the Women Talk Design community, and folks often want to know, at what point can I start asking to get paid? How do I approach that conversation? And I wanted to see if you could share any advice on that.
Yeah, what I would say is look at what comedians do. So a comedian will come up with a set, and then whether we realize it or not, even the most famous ones will go and find comedy clubs, like underground comedy clubs, where they practice and hone their sets, get it right, get feedback from an audience, get to a point where they're like, yep, well, people laugh in all the right places. I've nailed all the jokes. This is now a banger. And then they're going to go and charge $super for the Comedy Store or Comedy Central or SNL. And they have put work in, and so they now deserve to earn from their labor. I think of talks in exactly the same way. You may be at a point in your career where you've not had enough practice as a speaker. You can't be a keynote yet because you've not proven to yourself that you can draw an audience, that you can engage, that you can handle a large room. But practicing doing that at free events, and this is why I love grassroots events like community organized events, or for the first 8 years of my career at UX, I used to always speak at my old university once a year. I used to be like a visiting lecturer to talk about industry to students who were going through the master's degree I did. Like once you've practiced that, and you're like, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm good at this talk thing. And I'm maybe going to spend the next 2 months putting together a talk. Like it takes me a while now to create a talk. I have an opinion. I was talking about money and equity. I've been adding notes to a Notion file on that for the last couple of months. Like, and that's becoming a thing over time. That's labor. The other thing is when people are doing for-profit events, so you're selling tickets and you're earning a profit, you are a for-profit business. My time is part of your cost base, so it is worth paying for. I shouldn't be presenting for free and you walk away with a profit. That doesn't seem like a fair trade-off. So I would say ask to get paid whenever you're ready, and understand the event that you're speaking at, and use your own judgment to define what happens. But I definitely think, as you say there, LD, like there is no scenario where I'm paying someone else for the opportunity. Well, the scenarios are those conferences where it is an advertising show, right? Like it's 3 days of ads from companies who want to talk in front of people who may or may not be that engaged with them. Great. There are a bunch of people who will do that. That's not how I choose to speak on my own dime.
Lola, this has been so amazing. I'm very grateful for you sharing your stories and your honest perspective of how you approach public speaking and what you've learned along the way. So I want to say thank you so much for answering my questions and answering everyone's questions here. For everyone who attended, thank you for being here. I hope that you'll stick around. As I mentioned, we reserve this last bit of the event for you to keep the conversation going and to join in small groups to discuss some of the things that we talked about today. So I'm going to drop in the chat. If you do have to head out, there's a feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you, but I do encourage you to stay. We always hear in the feedback that folks that do get a lot out of this time. I'm going to have some prompts of just talking about where you are on your speaking journey. What was something that resonated that you heard today, and what's the best advice that you've received. So we're going to break everyone out for about 12 minutes or so. We'll bring everyone back together at the end to wrap things up. But before we do that, I just want to say again, a huge thank you to Lola, who we're so grateful for your generosity and your time, and that you have opinions and that you're sharing them, because we love to hear them.
Thank you so much. I will stick around as well to the end.
Awesome. Great. Okay. I'm going to open these up, and y'all join a breakout. We'll see you in just a bit.